All right, let's make sure you're on the right track so you have the right numbers to start with. What I usually like to do is I always come over to my current wages and then work from there. So these we just put right on in. Got the gross for Ryan, Sally, Trisha, and Vanessa. And then before I even put any of these in, I put them in here. I don't like that I did how I did this. I like to come over here and put in all of their withholdings. And then as I set up my payroll register, it should take them out if I have things set up right by just using, instead of, so I don't mistype something later on. So let's go ahead and put in that Ryan, he should have had his 401k deducted of 450, medical premiums of 500. And then in the other category, we would separate these out. Possibly when if we were really doing this for real, we would do this in a journal entry. We would separate these out. We could have different categories up here as well, but I decided just to put everything in other. Basically, anything in other means that it's not going to be subtracted from our taxable pay. I don't get to deduct it anywhere. Sally, we put in the 300 for her, let's see, 300 for 401k, 350 for medical premiums, and 200 for flexible. Trisha has 250 for medical premiums, 300 as child support, so put that in the other. And then Vanessa, 250 in medical premiums and 30 for union dues. So that would also be an other. Now I come over here and I like to start with, you can start wherever you want, but I like to start with Medicare. And what I would do is I would take my gross, so that I don't, in the future, I won't have to change this again. So I take my gross and then minus anything that needs to be taken out for Medicare. And the only one I can take out is the 500. And then I'm going to do this for the other ones as well. So I'm going to take the 12,500 and subtract out things for Medicare only. So I'm going to subtract out R6 and I'm going to subtract out T6, no, T6, S6. And then for Trisha, I'm going to take her gross wage and then subtract out her medical premiums. That's all she had. And Vanessa, the same thing. That's all she had was her medical premiums. Although something didn't go right on this one. Let's try this again. 37 minus medical premiums. That's better. S6R and S. Yeah, it looks good. Now for Social Security, this is obviously going to be, this is always the hardest one. In the prior wages, I combine these and just to show my FICA wages, so that's Social Security or Medicare. So this one, it's going to err on the side of Medicare to show me that, yep, I went over the cap being 137.7. So nothing is taxable for December. And then for Sally, if you take for FICA plus the 11,950, she's going to go way over the cap. So then we have to do step 2 for Sally, the 137.7, and then subtract out the 131,450 where she's at. Now, you wouldn't have necessarily known that until we've gone over here and done these. So that's one of the things I guess I should take a step back. Can't really do this column until we do this column. So this column is simply taking our FICA, our Medicare wages, and then multiplying this by the previous 11 months. and then the same thing for Sally. But I do not want to do the same thing for Trisha, because Trisha started, as you can see over here, in October. So she's only worked 2 months. And Vanessa only worked last month in November, so I don't even need to multiply that by anything, just one. Now I have the FICA wages, so I can look at caps. For the last 2 employees, Trisha and Vanessa, their Social Security is going to equal their Medicare. Now, for federal taxable wages, take my gross. And actually what you could do to make it even easier, take this and then subtract out any 401k options, because they also get to deduct that. That's really all you got to do. And then I can just scroll this, I can just keep this going down. So what it's looking for, did you have anything in column T? For me, to subtract out against your Medicare wages. We did for Sally, but we didn't have anything in column T, or yeah, column T for Trisha or Vanessa, because they didn't have any 401k. Then I can backtrack and do my federal wages the same way. Take this number, 12,150, multiply it by 11. Same thing for Sally, multiply it by 11. This, multiply it by 2. And this, multiply it by just 1, so just that. Total wages, that would be my gross wages to date. Simply taking this times 11. Same for Sally. This times 2, and this times 1. All right, so here's the numbers that you want to be starting. You want to start with. Don't have these, get these adjusted. And then we'll go about, you should, I'm going to guess you have pretty much all of your payroll withholdings done and your journal entries, but read through, make sure you have that the 401k were matched and that the employer's premiums was twice the employee's pay. We'll go through these in about 10 minutes as well. The hardest part is going to be calculating your federal withholdings. I'll leave these up as check figures. Actually, no, go ahead and write these down. I'm going to take this back off. Write these numbers down as your check figures and see if you get them. And if you get through with all of this before we review, go ahead and start working on the 941. Okay, let's look at the rest of the payroll register figures. And hopefully you got the same federal withholdings as I did. I always have to recalculate the federal withholdings every year, so there's a chance that I made a mistake in some of my copying. If any of these seem off to you, stop me right here so we can look at it in a little more depth. You could have made an error. I could have made an error. So it's always good to have a second pair of eyes look at this, see if there happens to be an error. Okay, I don't see anybody, I don't hear anybody speaking up, so I'm going to guess it looks okay. Social Security, hopefully you have that already built into your formula. Medicare the same way. State the same way. Actually, the state I have off here. I never adjusted this. Let me adjust my state. There we go. County, I put that everybody lives in Delaware County. So that is 1.5%. Indiana rate was 3.23. And then here are our final wages. And then over here is the taxable FUTA and SUTA. The taxable FUTA for Tricia, I come back over here to my federal wages. Remember the cap is 7,000. She's only 100 away. So we're definitely going to hit the cap. That's why this is only 100. And then I look at the SUTA. If I take 6,900, so let's pull up a calculator. If I take 6,900 plus her federal wages to date, 3,450, that's going to take us over the cap. So then we have to do cap minus current wages, 2,600 for Tricia. So that's why I got the 2,600. For FUTA, they are the same. They're the federal wages. They're the 3,250 here. And that's simply because if I take 3,250 plus this current wage, 3,250, I still don't hit the FUTA cap. So all of my current federal wages are taxable. Okay, so hopefully you started. If you haven't yet, go ahead and start on the form 941. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, maybe 15. The form 941 is one of the longest ones. So let's go 15 minutes and try to get that done. And if you get that done, go ahead and go on to the form W2s. Okay, let's look at, let's do form 941 first. The line 2, and we can't simply just take our federal wages and multiply it by 3 and be done. Remember, that's what line 2 is your quarterly wages for federal withholdings. So what I did instead is I went ahead and say, sure, we'll take this number, 30,500, and multiply it by 3. But then noting that Vanessa didn't work in October, so we need to subtract out 1 month of hers. So I took the I-9 times by 3, and then I just subtracted out 1 of her pay and pretended that that was the October pay. If her pay would have been different every month, I would have actually had to gone back to October. That's how I got the amount for line 2. Line 3, I did the exact same thing. Went over here to my federal withholdings, multiplied it by 3, and then took out 1 paycheck for Vanessa not working in October. Now, line 5A, there are lots of different ways you can go about this. I just picked this one this time. So one of the ways you could have went through it is did Ryan and said, okay, in October, he had full Social Security, so added that. his full Medicare amount, this, and then figured up how much did he not go over the cap in November, and then add that in. What I did instead, which I think may be a little easier on this one, is I took his Medicare wages plus his FICA wages and added them together and said, okay, that's his total, basically Medicare wages, and then subtract out how much he's over the cap. So in long form, this is what I did. I took his prior FICA wages plus his current Medicare wages to see how much in total did he make before any cap, and then subtract out the cap. So that's telling me that he's over the cap of 13,500. That's going to come into play here in a second. So this would be something that I don't have it manually, not manually, in all formulas. I actually had to go back in here. Whatever this number happens to be, and I'd have to type it in. I could do it so it was all formula based, and that's probably the better option. So when you do this here, and I'll probably update that in a little bit. Sally, I did the exact same thing I did for Ryan. I decided, okay, let's do her total FICA with Medicare in total, see how much she's actually over the cap. She's over the cap by 5,700. So what I did then is I had to do a couple different things. The first thing is I went over to K3, K9, and said full wages, no cap, this is how much they earned, 31,250, and then multiply it by 3. And then remembering that Vanessa didn't work in October, so subtract her one of her pays out, and then subtract out the two amounts that are over the cap, because not all of this is taxable, because some of it was over the cap. So I subtract out the 13,500 and the 5,700. So for this problem, to me, that seemed like the easiest method. But you could have easily done it and just shown all 4 people and then their wages each month. Could have shown Ryan, and that in October he had the full amount. In November he hit the cap, and then December nothing. You wouldn't even had to show December. December's already shown up in your payroll register. Sally, she didn't hit the cap in October or November, so full amounts of whatever Medicare was. Same for our third person, and then in Vanessa, she didn't have anything in October, so you could have done it that way. You could have shown each employee and what they had in October and November. Either way works, as long as you got 71,300. Then all I do is take that 71,300 and multiply it by 0.124. Line 5C is always the easiest one. Just take your Medicare wages, multiply them by 3, and then I subtracted out my employee who didn't work in October. And then multiply that by 2.9%, which is what's on the form. And you should probably just have that memorized, these two amounts. 2 times the Social Security, 2 times the Medicare. This would actually say line 5E now. It's changed, and this one would be line 6. So line 5E are your Social Security and your Medicare added. Line 6 is your total of the FICA, the line 5E and line 3. Excuse me. Line 14, now that we're at the bottom, Federal withholdings, that's going to be, this is the only one that you need to remember, that our last employee didn't work in October, so we only have the 3. So all I did is took the full federal withholdings and then just subtracted out for Vanessa. She didn't work. Social Security, all I did is take looked at, because nobody hit the cap in October. So I took the Medicare wages, subtracted out Vanessa again, and then multiplied that by 1.24, or 0.124 as a decimal. Again, I'm taking out Vanessa because she didn't work in October. She was a new hire. And then do the same thing for Medicare, except multiply it by 2.9%. So when I add all of them up, this is how much we should have had withheld. Okay, and then we come down here to the federal. The federal is real easy. We just take whatever October was because everybody worked, or take whatever December was. Same for December. Those two were the same amount. The Medicare, those two are going to be the same amount. It's just simply what everybody worked times 2.9. Same here, times 2.9. The amount that's going to be different is Social Security. So what I did for this is I said, okay, whatever the normal amount is, so K9, that would be our Medicare. Take whatever the Medicare is and then subtract out how much Ryan went over in November, because we know he went over. So what I had to do is take, how much was he over? Take, I went about it, this is how I went about it. I said, okay, this is what he made total in Medicare. This was the cap. So he went over by 900. So all I'm doing is subtracting out 900 from his total Medicare wages. And then when I come down here, I start again with the Medicare wages, but then subtract out all. So I subtracted out all of K5. So I came up here and I took the Medicare wages, subtracted out all of Ryan, because none of his wages were taxable in December for Social Security. And then I subtracted out what Sally was over. So I took her November pay plus, or her November year-to-date plus December, knowing that that's over, subtracting out the cap. That tells me how much she's over. There are different ways to go about doing this. Pick the way that you are doing right now. This is just one way that I picked. Key thing is, when it's all said and done, these 3 added up better be the same as line 10 and 11. And it is. Okay, so for the last, let's go about 10 minutes, and let's see how you do on the 940 and the W-2s. And then we'll finish up class by going through those 2 answers. Okay, for the Form 940, I didn't make out the side schedules like I had in the homework and our practice examples. I still did the same thing, just in longer formulas. If you didn't get these answers, you may want to jot it down, and then if you really need it, I will go through and make out the tables that we did in our class last week, very similar, where we'll have our total gross wages of all the employees and then all of their withholdings. And then down in the third one, how much is actually taxable each until we get to 7,000 to show how much is taxable each quarter. But this is what I had done. All right, so let's take a look at this first one here. I had D9 plus H9. Let's see what those are. So total wages to date plus my gross wages for December. That's all I needed to do to find my total wages. Remember, on the Form 940, they want your gross wages, not federal. We'll get to the federal. Then in line 4, what I did is I subtracted out for the number of pays. So for example, Ryan and Sally, when it says this R5 plus R6 right here, notice I multiplied that by 12 pays, because that's how many times they got paid, or actually in this case, taken out these two amounts. And then when I got to R7, Trisha only worked for 3 months, October, November, December. So I took that out 3 times. Vanessa only worked 2 months. And then for the flexible spending, this person had flexible spending taken out all 12 months. So I took the S6 times 12. And then I did the 401k. Since there was more than one, I just did the total. I could have put the total here too. I could have just dragged this down. It's going to be the same answer. If I would have had these 2 employees taking out, then I couldn't have done this method. I would have had to do them separately like I did over here. But since these both worked 12 months, I can do that. And my flexible guy, he only worked 12 months, or he worked all 12 months, she did. So that's how I got line 4. For line 7, what I did is I knew that 3 of the employees hit the cap. Ryan, Sally, and Trisha hit the cap in December. So all 3 of them hit 7,000. And then I just added in. All I did is I took this, her taxable wages, plus her prior taxable wages for federal, the $3,250. So that would have been for our final employee who didn't quite reach the 7,000 threshold. And then I can start working backwards to get the amounts. I know that for line 6, it has to equal this minus this for wages that are not taxed. And then this number has to equal this minus this, line 6 minus line 4, to say how much of the wages were over the cap, but not included in this original withholdings. So line 8, simply taking line 7 times 0.006. We had no penalties, nothing to repay, so line 11 is 0. That means line 12 is also 165. Then I come down to our final piece, and what I did here is I know from their wages that the 2 main employees who've been here all year, they hit the cap in the first quarter. They actually hit the cap in the first paycheck. So both at 7,000, So 14 grand times 0.006 is how much was liable in Q1. Didn't necessarily have to make a payment. That's just how much we owe. We didn't have any new employees in Q2, nothing in Q3, but we did get our other 2 employees in Q4. And that 13.5, that is simply Trisha's full 7,000. And then my other employee who made the 2 amounts. So this would be 7,000 for Trisha, and then Vanessa would be our taxable December wages and our taxable November wages. And then multiply this by 0.006. So now my 165 equals the 165 for line 12. Our last step, the W-2s. Hopefully this one shouldn't be too difficult. You could do this one of 2 ways. You could have just said, since there were no pay changes throughout the year, we could have taken our total taxable wages and then multiplied it by 12. I did essentially the same thing. I took total taxable wages plus my wages for the first 11 months. Box 3, I hit the cap, so I have to stop at the cap. Box 5, take our Medicare wages and then multiply it by 12, or take our Medicare wages and add in our prior wages. Federal withholdings, simply taking our how much we had withheld times it by 12. For box 4, it better be this. Easiest way is just to take this times 0.062. That's what it should be, but if you were doing this for real, you'd want to go back and check that. You'd want to add up all their Social Security withholdings and see if you really did withhold this amount as your check. You would do the same for Medicare. You would go through all their checks and add them up and then compare by taking this number times the 0.0145. Box 12, I went over here to the 401k, took the amount, and it's the same all year, so multiply it by 12. Code D. And on this one, I didn't put in boxes 18 and 19. I don't know why. I should have probably. But my box 16 is going to be the same as box 1. And then box 17 is going to, the best, there's 2 ways of doing it. And you could check it. And that's what we'd want to do here. That's why I'm glad I checked it here. So take the amount in box 16, multiply it by 3.23, and the check would be to take this number, our state withholdings, as long as it didn't change throughout the year, and multiply it by 12, and it is the same.